Fine, are you able to see?
I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks to those who are online watching us too. Appreciate you coming and being with us. My name is Matt Rui. I lead the .NET user group with Brian Olson, who's there in the back taking care of the camera. That just basically means that we organize the meetings, find awesome people like Vibov, and connect them with great sponsors like Farm Credit, and make the whole thing work. So it's been fun.
How do I share my screen?
I don't know. I think you might have to go. You might have to.
I know what's the problem. It should work now.
All right. So as usual, we're dealing with some technical difficulties because nothing's simple in technology, right? But again, we're glad you're here. We like to start our meetings off by making announcements about what's going on in the community. I know we just wrapped up with HDC yesterday and Tuesday and Monday as well. Was anybody there? I was there. Didn't see a lot of familiar faces there, but yeah.
Is there water or drink?
It was a pretty good conference. It's always kind of the premium developer conference for Omaha. So we're glad that's here, and we'll continue to support that. So what other announcements do we have? Ignite just happened as well. Oh yeah. Yep. Is that next week? Yeah, .NET Conf is happening next week, which is really, I think, Microsoft's focus area for .NET. So if you're a .NET developer, which you probably are, or you're related to some kind of .NET developer in some way, if you're here, that is definitely the conference to go to. It's all virtual. So I think in years past, at work, we organized just a conference room and had it playing in the conference room all day long. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. We might do that again this year. We'll see. But I recommend doing something like that. So what else, Brian?
.NET 6 and Visual Studio launching.
Oh yeah. There you go. Brian's full of them tonight. Yeah, .NET 6 is tomorrow or next week. Next week at .NET Conf they'll announce that. So that'll be the big deal. That's Microsoft's next LTS version of .NET. Long-term support. So .NET 5 has been Microsoft's short-term release. I don't know what they call them. They're in between release. But .NET 6 will be like the final version of that. And every other even-numbered version of .NET from here on out will be their LTS version. At least that's the strategy for now. They'll probably change their strategy. Yeah. Got any more?
Thanksgiving's in 3 weeks.
Yeah, get some pumpkin pie and turkey. All right, who else has any announcements for the group? Things you've been working on, cool podcasts you've listened to, conferences you've attended that might be interesting to other people?
There is another user group that people should attend.
There is a user group. I can't remember the name of it. No,
Azure user group.
Vibov, who is our presenter tonight, leads the Azure user group. If you have not seen Vibov present, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under. It's a big one because Vibov is all over the place, presenting whenever he can, wherever he can. I think this is your at least second one this year for us. And I try not to do repeat presenters, but Vibov's just very insistent, so we got him back.
I'm always glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're glad to have Vibov back again. I have the pleasure of being able to work with Vibov, so I get to see him on a regular basis. Yeah, so make sure you check out the Azure user group. They meet twice a month, which I think is nuts. That's crazy. I don't know how you keep up with all your schedule.
Another thing is Ignite just got over yesterday, I think, but there's a Cloud Skills Challenge going on, which if you will go, there is a Microsoft Learn module that you have to complete. If you will complete that module, they will give you one certification voucher that you can use and to appear for an exam for free.
That's nice. Yeah, that's what 150.
But it doesn't work on all the certifications. Before you sign up for that, they have provided a list of what certifications you can use that voucher for.
Okay.
It's just not for Azure. They have for Teams, for Windows, and for different stuff. But it has Azure Developer, Azure Administrator as well, I think.
Yep. If you need to know about certifications, Vaibhav's another great resource for that. He's got all kinds of them. So, okay. Any other announcements? All right. We'll go ahead.
I saw a tweet from Scott Henselman. The latest Code magazine has all the articles about .NET 6.
Oh, okay. So get a hold of the Code magazine.
The magazine cover says .NET 6, and I saw that tweet yesterday from Scott Henselman. So
Yeah.
I think that's gonna that magazine might be released next week, probably, because next week in .NET Conf they're gonna announce .NET 6 GA, right?
Yep.
I think so. Check it out if you want to. I think it's gonna be a good edition.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they give those away free, right? You can get.
With Visual Studio subscriptions, you
that's how
can
you-
get it free.
Okay, yeah, so if you have a Visual Studio subscription, you get that in the mail, probably.
And next week, Visual Studio.
That's right.
2022.
That's right.
Releasing.
Yeah.
Is it
yeah.
going GA next week
Yeah.
as well?
Yep, so 2022 is out and ready to be used next week.
Yeah,
So-
they have a couple of live sessions for Visual Studio and also C# 6 globally.
Yeah.
They have it. They have
Yeah, it's like 24 hours a day
Yeah.
for like 2 or 3 days. Yeah, it's kind of nuts. So, yeah, they have presenters all around the world that will present like nonstop. So it's kind of a crazy event. Yeah, so we'll wrap up with events there. I normally would introduce our sponsor, but I didn't have a chance to talk to anybody from Farm Credit beforehand. Is there somebody from Farm Credit that wanted to speak? They just absolutely, they trust us with their facilities. Like, you guys do whatever you want in there. But I will vouch for Farm Credit. I don't work for Farm Credit. I have worked for Farm Credit in the past as a contractor consultant. Phenomenal company, really the best. I mean, you see these facilities, they're second to none, and their culture is also second to none as well. So, really great company, great technology. They do some pretty cool stuff for the world, right? I mean, we all need food, so Farm Credit supports that, and agriculture in general. So, oh, Matt's here. Matt's gonna. Did you want to tell us a little bit about Farm Credit? I was butchering it up here, so.
You were butchering it? No, you were doing great.
Here you go.
So Matt probably didn't tell you he used to work here, or maybe he did. Farm Credit's a great community, or we kind of are a community. We have a whole campus, as you guys can see. We have just under 300 people in our IT department. We have just around 150 people on our application developer team, so a pretty large enterprise for the Omaha area. We're basically a .NET shop, but we have been adopting Salesforce as well. They got in our doors, and now we do it. So yeah, no, we're really happy to have everyone here in our building. Enjoy it. Free soda, pizza. Thank you guys. Yeah, I ordered way too much pizza, so eat, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Tomorrow for you for lunch.
That's right. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Vaibhav, who's going to tell us about Azure Devops multi-stage pipelines, right? YAML pipelines. You're in for a
Awesome.
treat.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
So I always feel excited to speak at .NET User Group. This is the first group that I have spoken at. That was back in 2017. I've always keep telling this to Matt that he was the first guy who was ready to take a risk on me speaking. So I think that has really changed my life. Since then, I have been speaking at many events, but yeah, thanks, Matt. Matt has been the guy who has given me the first opportunity. So if you have been interested or you have been thinking about speaking, you can come to .NET User Group and speak. You are more than welcome to come and speak at Azure User Group as well. So this is a great platform to start your speaking journey if you are interested in. Anyways, thanks everyone for having me here. It's always fun to be here. Today we are going to talk about multi-stage YAML pipelines with Azure Devops. My assumption has been that most of the audience would be using Azure Devops in their work. If not, I'll just brief a little bit about Azure DevOps, but if you need more insights, you can always reach out to me and I will be able to help you out. With that, a little introduction about me. All those things that you see, those badges that happened when Matt let me speak here. So I've been awarded MVP award just because of my community contributions, and again that started when Matt let me spoke in this .NET User Group. Anyways, I'm by profession I'm a cloud architect. I'm colleague of Matt and Brian. We sit next to each other and in next tiles to each other. So I work for Kivit as well, and my current job is not primarily linked to application development. It's primarily focused towards cloud and cloud governance and writing cloud strategy and standards and stuff. But I come from .NET background and I have been developer for almost 10 or 12 years. So I still enjoy looking at .NET code, or at least Azure DevOps, seeing CI/CD pipelines. I was born and brought up in India. I've been in Omaha since 2016, and it has been revolutionary in my life. I've been living my American dream, so it's been great. And yeah, Matt touched upon certifications. If anyone is interested in any Azure role-based certification, feel free to reach out to me. I can help you with some of that preparation. All right, so without further ado, let's see what we are going to talk about today. We'll talk about Azure Pipelines, which is the pipelines component within Azure DevOps. Then we'll look specifically at the YAML schema, which is one of the ways you can create those pipelines in Azure DevOps. And then I have prepared few demos to show you how you can get started with those YAML-based pipelines. And if time permits, then we can certainly have question and answers before wrapping up. So for the benefit of those people who have not used or seen Azure DevOps in the past, Azure DevOps is a suite of services within that, starting from Azure Boards, which lets you manage your project. It provides tools like boards, and you can manage your work items, bugs, and whatnot. Azure Repos lets you manage your source code. Test plans lets you write your test cases and stuff. Artifacts is where you can store your binaries. And then Azure Pipelines is where you can build your code and release your code to any deployment target. And that is what we are going to talk today. Before we talk about Azure Pipeline, just to be on the same page, I thought it's important to understand what is continuous integration and continuous delivery. So if you have seen any software development process, it has multiple phases. It starts with planning, then coding, building, testing, and then releasing, deploying, operating, and monitoring. So the build and test phase generally constitutes the continuous integration phase, and release and deploy falls under continuous delivery phase. So essentially, continuous integration refers to the process of constantly and consistently testing and building your code at every check-in. Whenever you check in your code, you must build it, test it before you can release it. And the release is handled in the continuous delivery process, which is essentially the process of shipping your code. All right. So what's the benefit that you get out of CI/CD process? In short, is for continuous integration, continuous delivery. Well, the CI process lets you improve your code coverage because it also includes the test phase of your SDLC. It helps you build faster by splitting your build and the test runs. So once your source code gets built, then you run the next step of test. It ensures that you don't ship anything which fails in production, so you can catch bugs before it makes it into production. And continuous delivery certainly enables you to deploy your code automatically whenever it's pushed into your source code. So what's Azure Pipeline? Azure Pipeline is a cloud service. It's part of Azure Devops, which lets you do both CI as well as CD as part of your SDLC process. There are two ways you can create it. One is known as Classic, which is a UI-based method where you can go ahead in the portal and you can drag and drop different tasks, and you can create your build pipelines and release pipelines. Continuous integration pipelines are sometimes called build pipelines. Continuous delivery pipelines are sometimes called release pipelines. So essentially you can create build and release pipelines in that UI. And the other one, the most recent one, has been called the Yaml-Based pipelines, which we are going to look at today. YAML is a language which you can use to define your pipelines within Azure DevOps. Azure Pipelines supports several programming languages. It's just not for .NET developers. If you come from a different background, you can use it for any of those supported programming languages. You can run your pipelines on agents, which could be self-hosted or which could be Microsoft hosted. I have a slide later to talk about what agents are and what they do. But to be aware that you can run self-hosted and Microsoft hosted agents, and those all support all different kinds of operating systems ranging from Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. And Azure Pipelines is one of the services which just doesn't work within Azure DevOps. You can actually use it with other source code repos as well. You can integrate Azure Pipelines with GitHub, Bitbucket, and so on. You can deploy your code to multiple targets. It's just not meant to deploy it in Azure. Because it says Azure DevOps, it doesn't mean that you can only deploy your code to Azure. You can deploy it to on-prem. You can deploy it to AWS or any other location. It could be any deployment target. And lastly, it supports NuGet, NPM, and Maven-based packages if you use any of those. Mostly it's going to be NuGet packages if you are a .NET developer. So here is how the classic pipelines work. As a developer, you go ahead, you edit your code, you push your code into the repo, which triggers a build pipeline, a continuous integration pipeline, which builds the task, which has build task and test task, which essentially build your code and then tests your code. Then it essentially creates a build artifact, which is the binary, which is the output of your build task, which is then passed it over to the release pipeline or the continuous delivery pipeline, which picks up that artifact and deploys it to the deployment target, be it on premises or Azure or AWS or wherever you want to do. On the contrast, what YAML does is YAML merges both the CI and CD pipelines into a single phase. As you can see, so you go ahead and edit code. Along with your source code, what you also do is you also include a YAML-based file, which defines your pipelines, not only build, but also your release pipelines. You define what you want, how do you want to build your code, how do you want to test your code, then how you also want to deploy your code inside that YAML file. Then along with your other source code files, you also push that YAML file to the code repo, which triggers the pipeline based on top of the YAML file that you have checked in, and it essentially does the same thing. Whatever task you have defined in your YAML file, it goes ahead and executes it. YAML is hard, super hard, because once it starts giving you errors, it can really get frustrating. If you don't believe me, go and check out Scott Henselman's tweet, I think 3 months back. He tweeted about the same thing, that YAML is frustrating because, first of all, it's not a markup language. Head out to yaml.org. It's the website where you can go and check out these schema and the syntax of how this language works. But essentially, it's human readable format. It uses indents or indentation to as a delimiter, as well as it also uses simple characters. As you can see, it's pretty much easy to read a YAML file. It's close to text, but there are a few things you should notice. That the name key value pairs that you see here, for example, the very first one where YAML : YAML int markup language, so it's a key value pair, how you define your string-based key value pairs. You will notice there are no quotes, single quotes or double quotes around the strings, because it didn't expect that. Everything is string. And lastly, if you will see towards the bottom, how they have defined all the list items. Nothing that you should be really know everything on tips, but if you have some idea of how YAML structure works, it would be handy to work on your YAML pipelines. All right, so here is a snapshot of how a YAML-based Azure pipeline looks like. It all starts with a trigger. And as the name suggests, trigger is the entry point of your pipeline. It's an event that happens. It could be a code check-in, it could be a manual trigger, it could be anything. There are few types of trigger we'll discuss in the next slide. But trigger essentially triggers your pipeline. Pipeline contains multiple stages. It can have one or more stages. Each stage has what are known as jobs. Jobs have what are known as steps. Steps are nothing but tasks or scripts that you actually want to go and execute. So your single unit of execution is a step. And then one of those tasks or scripts, which is essentially a step, can do whatever you would like to do. It can be used to deploy a artifact. It could be used to deploy our app service. It could be to call a REST-based webhook API. It could be used for anything. It's all up to you how you want to utilize that task, and we'll see what all we can do. Here's a sample pipeline. As you will see, on the very top is a trigger. What it says is it's a branch trigger, and that pipeline gets triggered whenever there is a code change being pushed into the master branch. Under that you will see stages, and what I'm showing you is a single stage right now for build. Within that you will see different jobs, and I have a job for building my code. Then you will see that we are passing a VM image here under the pool, which essentially indicates the agent operating system on which our pipeline should be executed. You can declare your variables under the variables section. Then here are your actual units of execution under steps. As you will see, there are multiple tasks, and since it's an array of tasks, you can see how it has been defined in YAML using hyphens. But anyways, under that we are restoring NuGet packages, building the code, and then testing the code and publishing the artifact so that it can be taken forward. So let's get started and look into each of those quickly one so that everyone understands what each of these are. Starting with a trigger, as I was saying earlier, it initiates a pipeline to run. There are 4 main kind of triggers at a high level, starting with the continuous integration triggers, which essentially gets triggered whenever you push a code check-in. For example, what you are seeing towards the right is a continuous integration trigger. What it is doing is whenever you push a code change in your master branch or in any of the release branch, it will trigger it, except when you have a release branch which has old as a prefix in its name. So that's why you will see include and exclude. It includes all the changes in your master branch and releases, but it will exclude any branch within releases which is prefixed with old. You can also trigger based on tags. There is a concept of tags where you can tag your branches. You can utilize that in your triggers. You can batch your triggers as well. So if there are multiple developers working in your development team, then you can batch all those changes coming in, and then you can execute them together, push them together rather than running your pipeline every time. And sometimes there are cases where you have files that you don't want to really push, like files like README files. You don't include bin and object directories in your project structure. So sometimes you need situations where you want to exclude the files which, when updated, they should not trigger the pipeline, and that's where what you are seeing here. That this trigger pretty much triggers my pipeline whenever there is a code change that is checked in the master or releases. But when I make change in my README markdown file, it doesn't triggers my pipeline. The next one on the list is a pull request trigger. So whenever your developers create a pull request, you can trigger your pipeline at the pull request approval. You can go ahead and set up your pull request triggers using build policies in Azure Devops. And the UI looks something like this, where you can provide all the triggers, all the parameters, and get that set up. The next one is schedule triggers. As the name suggests, you can trigger your pipeline on a schedule. It uses cron syntax to set up the schedule. As you can see here, there are two triggers here. One runs every midnight daily, and the second one runs once a week. Last but not the least, pipeline triggers. What these triggers are for, you can trigger one pipeline based on the second pipeline. So whenever your second pipeline gets completed, you can trigger one more pipeline on that. So those are the pipeline triggers. Finally, if you don't want any automatic trigger, you don't want your pipelines to be triggered on an event, you can set trigger as none. Then you can manually go ahead and trigger those pipelines as and when you require. The next object in the YAML pipelines are stages and jobs. Let's look at those. So this is a syntax of stage within a stages section. As you can see, it starts with the name of a stage, the display name that you want to show for it. You can define the dependencies, because if you have multiple stages, you can define the dependencies, like your stage 2 should be only run when your stage 1 is completed. You can define those kind of dependencies in depends on. And then you can also define conditions that your particular stage should only be executed when there is a condition that gets successful. Here is where you can define specific pool if you want to run your stage on a different pool than the overall pipelines pool. Here are the how you can define your variables, and then within each variable, after variable, you can define the jobs that you want to execute in your stage. Quickly, to show you how you can create dependencies, towards the left, if you will see, I have a stage called test, which depends on my build stage. So what it will do is, my test stage will not get executed unless my build stage is completed. Likewise, my deploy US stage doesn't get executed until my test stage is completed. And finally, the deploy Europe stage gets only executed when test and deploy US gets executed. On the same lines, as I was saying, we can also control the flow using conditions. As you can see here, my test stage only gets executed when the previous stage gets succeeded. As you can see here, I am passing a condition succeeded without a name of the stage. So what it essentially is doing is, the first stage, if it gets successful, then only my test stage gets succeeded. Similarly for deploy US. And if you will see in deploy Europe, it uses both depends on and condition. Deploy Europe it gets only executed only after the first 3 stages have been executed, and it will only get executed when you cannot deploy code to US. Moving on, under each stage, as I said, it's a collection of jobs, and a job is a collection of one or more steps. Every pipeline needs to have at least a job, because each job will then have at least one task, which is the actual unit of execution in a pipeline. There are 3 kinds of jobs that you can run: agent pool jobs, server jobs, and container jobs. Agent pool jobs is basically run on a pool of agents. Server jobs is basically run on specific servers if you want to define use for your pipelines. And then container jobs are basically which are containerized, but they still run on the agents. Towards the right, I'm showing you a schema of how you can define jobs and the different values you can provide. To highlight some of those, within jobs array, you can define multiple jobs. In this example, there are 2 jobs, debug and release. And here you can see a job called Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Here you are deploying on 3 different images. As you can see, you are defining different pools there. Oops. Similar to stages, you can define dependencies. Here it is, you are using fan out pattern, where when your first job gets succeeded, you can execute the second and third job. Here's how you can implement fan-in pattern in your pipeline. Here, unless your initial A and initial B job gets completed, your subsequent job doesn't get executed. Similar to stages, you can use conditions, failed, succeeded, so that you can control the flow of your pipeline. You can have multiple conditions, just not single condition under the condition tab. One important piece to notice there is you can also define what is known as an execution strategy within your jobs. And there are primarily 2 different kinds of strategies. One is matrix strategy, the other one is parallel strategy. Matrix strategy enables you to run a job multiple times with different variable sets. If you want to call the same job but with different parameters, you can use matrix strategy. Parallel strategies, as the name suggests, if you want to run multiple jobs in parallel, you can use the parallel strategy. If you are specifically deploying your code to a deployment target, I mean, you can do multiple things in your job. You can build code, you can test, you can do anything. But if you are specifically deploying your code to a deployment target, you can use a specialized job known as deployment job, which is targeted for your deployment activities. As you will see, it's pretty similar to deployment, to the plain vanilla jobs, except a few differences. The primary difference is when you run your normal jobs, they don't maintain any history. Whereas if you will use deployment jobs, it will maintain a deployment history. So which is pretty useful when you are trying to deploy your code to a deployment target. And then it also supports multiple strategies like rollover or run once or canary. If you are trying to implement one of those deployment strategies, you can utilize those strategies inside your deployment jobs. As I was talking earlier, there are 2 types of agents, self-hosted and Microsoft hosted. As the name suggests, self-hosted agents is completely owned and managed by customers. Microsoft hosted agents are managed by Microsoft. Self-hosted agents can be on premises. It could run in Azure, AWS. The only thing is it needs to run an agent that is provided by Microsoft so that Azure Devops can pick it up. And both types of agents supports Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Moving on, the last phase in a YAML pipeline, an individual step, which essentially is the unit of execution. Pretty much similar format like jobs and stages. Oops. As you can see, within steps you have a task. You can have display name. You can define condition. If you want to continue on error, just in case your task failed, you can use continue on error condition. And then you can define different other parameters. When you start creating your YAML pipelines, you can utilize built-in task, which is offered by Azure Devops. And you can also create your own task and task groups if you want to write your own. Last but not the least, the best part about YAML-based pipelines over classic pipelines are you can use what are known as templates. You can create your YAML templates and share it across your teams, which makes essentially your pipeline templates to be repeatable and reusable. So what you are seeing towards the very left is a template, and towards the right is a YAML pipeline where you can use the template. The advantage is if you are an architect or if you are a lead, you can create these templates and share it with your development teams, and they can consume these templates and utilize in their pipelines. That way you promote reusability, and you also ensure that everyone meets the standards. with that was a quick intro to what YAML pipelines are, what are the different sections within a YAML pipeline. I guess it's time we should jump onto a Azure portal and solution so that I can show you how it all works. So to start with, what I have done is you can also do whatever I'm going to show you. I can share all the files with you as well, but if you want to get started, what I have done is there is a website known as Azure Devops Demo Generator. What it provides is there are many community provided templates that you can use in Azure DevOps to get started with your POCs. If I go ahead and sign in, I can show you what you see there and what I have done for today's demo. Oops. Okay, it came in. So if you'll go here, you can provide a project name that you want to create based on the template that you choose. You can choose the organization. Organization is, it's referring to the Azure DevOps organization where you want to create that project. But if you'll go and choose templates here, you will see there are different templates that you can choose from. If you'll go to Microsoft Learn, if you have been taking any lessons from Microsoft Learn, you can get many of those samples here that you can get it on your Azure DevOps organization and you can start using. Anyways, what I've done is there is a reference architecture called Parts Unlimited, which sells automotive part. So I have used this particular template called Parts Unlimited YAML, which comes with the boilerplate YAML pipeline. So I've selected that template and I have already created that project in my Azure DevOps organization. As you can see, here is my Parts Unlimited project. If I'll go and show you the repos, there is a single repo which has all my source code. Here is my source code. Here's the website that I have. It's a plain website. If I go to Visual Studio quickly and show you, here is the solution. Let me open up the solution and run it and show you how it works. Locally, it creates a database and runs on that, but when it gets deployed in Azure, it basically utilizes an Azure SQL database. I will show you how that CI/CD pipeline is going to look like. But to just give you once a look at the website that we are looking at today, it's a .NET, ASP.NET based application. Let me go ahead and run it. So the very first time what it does is if it doesn't find the database, it goes ahead and creates a local copy of the database and sets it up for us. And it might take a few seconds, but it will come up. So here's the Parts Unlimited website that's running locally right now. As I said, you can buy automotive parts. I'll go ahead and stop that for now. The next thing I'm going to do is let me go ahead and show you the pipeline that came as part, the boilerplate pipeline that came as part of that template. As you will see within the repository, there is Azure Pipelines.yaml. Here is the YAML pipeline that they have provided to start with. As you can see, it comes with a trigger which it triggers my pipeline every time there is a code check-in on my master branch. It runs on a Visual Studio 2017 image which runs on Windows 2016. It is expecting certain parameters here, or variables here. It is setting those variables. Then there are certain steps. There is an array of tasks that it's doing. It's installing NuGet here. Then it's restoring NuGet packages. It's building my solution. It's running tests, and then lastly it's deploying. One way to edit these pipelines is certainly I can go back to Visual Studio and open it and start editing it there and committing the code change. That's one way to do it. I can directly go in Azure DevOps, click on edit here and start editing it here and commit my code changes. But the best way that I like is how to edit is I go into pipelines. As I said, it automatically identifies the YAML pipeline when you check it in as part of your source code. If I'll go and click it here and click on edit, it will open the same Azure Pipelines YAML file. You can see it here. It's opening the same YAML pipeline that I was showing you. You can see all the tasks that you see here. Essentially, right now, it's a single stage pipeline. You will see there is no stage section here. Whenever you don't define a stage, it considers it as a single stage pipeline. Before we can go ahead and run it, one thing that I want to do is I want to configure my deployment, because right now it's all boilerplate. It doesn't have a connection to my Azure subscription so that it can deploy my web app. I'm going to use a service connection. If you're not aware of what's a service connection in Azure DevOps, it's a connection that you can create to your deployment targets. And I've already created one to my Azure subscription, which you can see under service connections. Otherwise, if you already have subscriptions, I can go ahead and essentially choose one of these subscriptions, and it will create service connections here itself. But to save time, I have already created one, which I will choose here. And the last thing that I want to choose is a web app where I want to deploy an app service, where I want to deploy my app service. So you will see there are two app services. If I go to my Azure portal, before the demo, I have already created the underlying resources. What you're seeing is there are two websites. One is for dev environment, one is for prod. And then there are two SQL databases, one for dev and one for prod. So right now, since it's a single stage pipeline, I want to deploy my code changes to just dev, but I will later show you how we can deploy it to multiple environments. With that, I'll go ahead and click on add. And as you will see, it automatically updated it. One critical thing to note here is it's very messy here. What it does is it checks the position of your cursor, and when you click on that add button, it will add the code there. For example, if I go ahead and I have clicked somewhere, and if I go ahead and add a task, like let's say the first one, and click on add, you will see it will add there. It picks up your cursor position and it just adds that content there. So be cognizant of that, and before you go and click on add, be cognizant that you are adding at the right position. Anyways, my initial boilerplate pipeline is now complete. Let's click on save, and I am going to directly commit it to the master branch. I could certainly create feature branches and do that in a real world, but since my pipeline is set to trigger on a check-in in my master branch, I'm going to commit directly to the master branch so that it can trigger my pipeline. So essentially, the file that I'm changing, it's going to trigger pipeline on itself. So I clicked on save. Let me go back to the pipelines again. And as you will see, this icon says that this has been queued. I'll go ahead. Right now, you will see under the stages section, there is one single stage here. Let me go ahead and click on that. As you will see, there is a single job inside my stage. And here is my job. As you can see, it's right now initializing my job. What it's essentially doing is it's finding a agent. I'm using Microsoft hosted agent right now. So it's finding an agent where it can go ahead and execute each of these jobs. So now it has figured out an agent. What it's doing is now it went ahead and installed NuGet. It's restoring NuGet packages now. Next, it's going to build my code. Then it's going to test my code. And then it's going to deploy it in Azure in my Azure subscription. By the time it gets complete, to show you that it's really deploying to my application, let me go ahead in the app service in Azure and go ahead and click on the URL for that. You will see it's the plain vanilla app service right now. We'll come back here once my code gets deployed. Right now, it is still building and testing. Once it gets deployed, when we'll go back, you will see that the application is running in my website. It might take a minute, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me now. I can certainly answer.
Traditionally, without using YAML, the other way, deploying to JSON files, we have build and release separate.
Oh yeah, good point. Let me show you that by the time this gets completed, so that you know how the classic pipelines works.
So since it has no stage defined, there will be single stage. Then in the release, also can we see that release is completed?
Yeah, so there is no release right now. It's just a task which is deploying my code. So that's why, which is running now. So if you will see, it's deploying my code to Azure right now. But there is a single stage. I have not segregated my pipeline into multiple stages. But by the time that gets completed, if I go back to that project again, one way that I've shown you was the YAML-based pipelines, but you can also go ahead and have classic pipelines. If you'll go ahead and click here, new pipeline, it will give you an option either to start with Azure repo Git. You can, since we are in Azure Devops, I'll choose this. I can choose where I am. Where is that? Oops. Did they remove that option? I don't know, I have not. It used to be there earlier. It used to give an option to, oh, here you go. You see that use a classic editor to create a pipeline without Yammer. If you'll click on that, then you can go ahead and start with the classic pipelines. You can choose the repo on which you want to create, then you can go ahead and.
The previous scheme used to be the old scheme.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
They keep changing UI, so I got confused once, but yeah, this is how you can then go ahead and choose whichever. Let's say I want Azure Web App for ASP.NET, and it will create the boilerplate pipeline for me. Right now, this is a single stage pipeline, what I'm showing you it in YAML, where it's building and deploying code as well. But ideally, in classic UI-based pipelines world, there used to be two different pipelines. What you see here towards pipelines here, it used to be called as build in the past. And what you are seeing here in releases, there used to be release pipelines. Both had similar UIs where you can drag and drop those UI-based tasks. Okay, so it says my pipeline is completed. All my tasks within the pipeline was completed. And if I go here and click on this, you can see my stage is successful. Let me go ahead and refresh my website and see if it's working. As you can see, it's running in Azure. My app has been updated, the same app that I was running online, running locally earlier. Okay, so this is easy. This is a single stage pipeline. How do we convert it into multi-stage pipeline? So let's go ahead and edit it. To save time, I already have created the pipelines code. So what essentially I'm doing now is I have added two stages. One stage which builds my code, builds and tests, and the other one is which deploys. If you will remember, before in the boilerplate, I was not publishing any artifact because everything was running in the same stage. So they can literally read all the artifacts that were generated in the build task. But since now I'm deploying in a different stage, I have to publish artifact as an output of my primary stage and then read it in the second stage. So that's where this publish build artifact and deploy download build artifact is. But then essentially I have broken down my pipeline into two tasks now between build and deploy. I'll go ahead and click on save, essentially the same thing. I'll go ahead and commit it to the master branch so that it can go ahead and trigger it. But instead of one stage, I should be seeing two stages now. As you can see now, it says there are two different stages. I'll go inside. As you can see, there is one stage for build, one stage for deploy. And it's going to take same time. Now in most real worlds, it will not be just a single environment. You will have a lower environment and a production environment. So you can handle those in your pipelines too. To get started with that, what you essentially need to do, the first thing is go inside the environments tab, click on create environment, and you can name whatever is appropriate for your environment. For my example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two different environments, one called dev and one called prod. And I'll show you why I need to create those environments. The number one reason is I can use these environments in my deployment job. And then I can also have what are known as approval checks. For example, I am not worried if a developer in my team goes ahead and pushes a bad code change in dev branch or a dev environment, but if a code is going to be pushed into production, I really want to approve that code change before it can go. So I'm going to create an environment called prod. And if you'll go here towards the right and click on approvals and checks, you can actually have multiple approval gates. It could be a webhook, as simple as a webhook. You can call Azure function. You can do whatever you have been doing in your traditional pipelines. For the demo sake, I'm going to add an approver here. Since I'm the only user in this organization, I'm just going to add myself. And now if there is any pipeline which goes ahead and deploys code in production environment, it's going to need my approval to push that code change in. Let's go back to the pipeline that I was running. It is still building my code. Bear with me, it takes a little time to build and deploy. And this was the smallest code base that I could find that builds and deploys that fast. Other ones were taking more time. But essentially, so far what you have seen is there was a single stage pipeline. We took it, we broke it apart into two different stages, one for build and one for deploy. The next thing we are going to do is we want to take it from 2 stages to 3 stages. We'll have a build stage, which will build the artifact, then we'll deploy it to dev, and then we'll deploy it to prod in the third. And when it reaches the third stage, it will wait for my approval, and unless I don't approve, it won't go ahead and push the code change. So this pipeline is completed. Let me go ahead and set up the pipeline for 3 stages. If I go here, click on the pipeline, as you can see, 1 and 2 all are good. I'll go ahead and get the code for 3 stages. Oops. Now, before I change that, one thing you notice here is so far I have been using normal plain vanilla job here. But what I'm going to show you in next example is that instead of using a job, since I'm deploying in my deploy stage, I'm using a specialized job known as deployment job, so that I can then define the deployment strategy for my deployment, whether it is run once, should it deploy just once, or should it be canary or other ones. So as you can see, nothing changes in my build stage. Pretty much it restores packages and then builds and tests and publishes the artifact. But when I go to my deploy to dev and deploy to prod stage, essentially I'm using now a deployment job, which runs on my environment dev, and the production one runs on the environment production. And it uses a strategy called run once. It essentially just run once. I can certainly go ahead and use other strategies depending on whichever project I'm working on. Then I'm defining a single task which picks up my artifact and goes ahead and deploys. Looks good. Any questions so far? You can interrupt and you can ask me questions if I am running too fast.
For example, if web app has environment variables, how will we set them?
You can configure all those. I will show you. If you will go here, click on settings, you see all the file transformations here. You can go ahead and do XML transformations, JSON transformations, and one application and configuration settings. You can go ahead and specify your app settings and configuration settings here, and it will go ahead and overwrite your configuration files with the settings that you provide here.
So the app settings will differ based on the stage I'm deploying?
So what I'm doing here is I'm not changing my I'm changing a task in my pipeline. So my code already has web config, and when I go here in my individual task, what I'm literally saying here is go ahead and take app settings from here. If the app setting doesn't exist in my web config, add it, and if it exists, overwrite it. So that just before deployment, it will pick up the settings that I'm providing here. It will pick those settings and deploy my app with that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but web app is okay. For example, there are so many other Azure services Ansible logic as
So it could be either most likely it will have configuration either in XML or JSON format. That's where you can use these XML transformations and JSON transformations.
But if the settings are different from Dev,
So that will depend upon the individual type as well. For example, if you go ahead and add a different task, I mean, I'm been in the Azure App Service task, but depending upon which task, for example, if you go in, let's say MySQL database, so it automatically comes with appropriate settings that you can go and change it. It's not that all the tasks have the same properties that you have to define here. So individual tasks can have different properties that you can provide to it so that it can configure your underlying resource. I'll go ahead and click on save, and we can keep talking about that so that at least it triggers my pipeline and we can save some time. I did saved it. So this time it should really go ahead and instead of 2 stages, it should now be running in 3, which is you are seeing here. It's building my code and testing, and then it will deploy to dev. And then I'm expecting that it will go ahead and wait before it deploys to production for my approval. Now, by the time this runs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you templates, how templates work, because it's going to take at least a couple of minutes to complete. What I have done is, if I go here, let me go to Git changes and pull the latest so that I don't miss on any changes. Okay, so if I go here in folder view, I have my multi-stage pipeline, that's fine. Now what I have done is I have added a template for my deployment. So if you will see, one thing you would have noticed here is in my pipeline, if you will look at deploy to dev and deploy to prod stages, apart from the difference in environment, which environment they are getting the app deployed to, they are essentially using the same code. They are using the same task. There is just the configuration which is different, but essentially there is a scope for reusability. We can use something known as template, and that's what I'm doing here. I picked up this particular code and I've created a template for it here, which essentially expects certain parameters like the subscription to which it should deploy to, the environment it should deploy to, and the website name. What you're seeing here is these are the default parameters. If I use my template in a pipeline and I don't provide those parameters, it defaults these to these. And here is exactly the same deployment job that you were seeing. Instead of hard coding the values here, I'm using the incoming parameters like environment name here, the resource manager connection, which is essentially the service connection, and the website name. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and update my pipeline to use template instead of using the individual task repeatedly. So I'll go ahead and get that code. I'll go ahead and make changes. So now you will see it really simplifies my code. If you will look at my deploy to dev and deploy to prod stage, essentially what I'm telling it is, go ahead and pick up this template, and here are the parameters, and go ahead and execute it. So what happens is, if you are an architect or if you're a lead, you can literally define what you want to do inside your task, and then you can share your templates with your teams, and they just need to consume those templates in your pipelines, in their pipelines. That way you can enforce the standards that you want to have in your pipelines, and it also promotes reusability. So that's how we are using templates here. Let me see if the previous pipeline got completed. Okay. It's requiring, okay, since I'm using the environment for the first time, it requires administrators to go ahead and allow a pipeline to use a particular environment within the pipeline. So I'm going to permit it for now so that it can go ahead and deploy the code in development. Hopefully it should be done quickly. Deployment doesn't take much time. And sorry?
This is basically
consolidating with the YAML, you had separate build and release.
Yeah, but it's all in the same YAML file. And the advantage you will notice here is like if you have development teams who are working on different branches, on different releases, and you want to deploy your code to different app services or different deployment targets, each of those feature branch can have their own copy of YAML file, and they can deploy to whichever deployment target they want to deploy to. You really get control on how your pipeline should behave, whereas if you consider the classic ones, that you didn't have that option. Your pipelines used to run on whatever code has been checked in on your branch. This got deployed, so I wanted to show you one thing as well to show you that it's working. If you'll go to the Azure Pipelines, you will see that it has automatically updated the settings for my deployment within app service. It says these are the details for my Azure Devops organization and pipelines, which is pushing the code changes to my app. Anyways, this got completed. Now, as you will see, it says, okay, that's the production environment. Since I'm using it for first time, I'm gonna go and permit it. But now, wait and see, it's gonna go and ask for approval. Here you go, it says one approval needs a review before this can deploy to prod. And this is just a demo, so I have used an approval gate, but you can literally go ahead and do things like you can send a request to your ITSM system. You can call any webhook, you can call an Azure function to go and do something and come back. It's all up to you what's a requirement. I'm gonna just go and click on review. I can approve it or I can reject it if I don't like the code change. I like the code change, I'm gonna go and deploy it, so it's gonna go ahead and deploy my code to the production. And now if you will see, for the very first time, my production app will be deployed. If I go ahead and open that one, this is not right now plain vanilla web app. Once it gets deployed, it will have my code changes. As you will see, it says one check passed here. If I'll click on that, it gives me the details of the approval gate that I had. It said all the requirement was that all approvers must approve, and I was the guy who approved it. So hopefully it should not take much time. It's pushing the code changes to the app service. Oops. Demo gods. Okay, never mind. By the time this comes back, hopefully that will start working. I guess it's still in the middle of deployment. But once this, I guess you get the idea of the approval gates there. Let me go ahead and push the code changes. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push my template and pipeline, this one and this one, which is my code changes. I'm going to say templates code, and I'm going to commit it and push it. Oops, what happened? There is nothing if I go ahead and push it. Okay, it went through, I guess. Let me go ahead and see here. Okay, so you can see it says templates code. That was the comment I gave there, so my code changes were pushed in. I didn't edit an additional stage at this moment. What I essentially did was added templates. So if I go back to my repo, you can see here is my pipeline that I modified to use the template, and here is my template file. So let's see if the pipeline goes ahead and picks up the template and works. By the time this gets completed, last thing that I want to show you is, right now what I have shown you is stages which can build your code, test your code. You can pick it up and deploy it in different environments. You can actually leverage your pipelines to also deploy your infrastructure to Azure, what is known as infrastructure as code. So that's my last demo. What I'm going to show you is, right now I already have created resources in Azure to which I was connecting to and deploy my code. In the next demo, I'm going to actually create those resources on the fly in each stage. So I will build my code, test them, then I will create my app service and database, then I will deploy my code to that, and then I'll create it for production and deploy it to production. So for that, I have already created my deployment project, which has all the ARM templates to create my app service and my web app. To show you, let me quickly go to the project view, and here is the environment folder that I have created. If I'll expand my deployment project, here's my ARM template. If you are not aware of what is ARM template, in the Azure space, if you want to create any resource, it essentially works on Azure Resource Manager, which stands for ARM. And you can create your ARM templates, which are JSON-based templates, and you can deploy them and create resources in Azure through them. But certainly you can utilize any other kind of infrastructure as code tool to create these resources. But what you're seeing here is a JSON-based template that I have to create my web app and SQL database. I'm going to jump out of this and go back to the folder view once. And then I have also created another template which goes ahead and deploys my, which picks up my templates that I was showing you, the ARM templates, and deploys it to Azure. And in my pipeline, what I'm going to do is, right now I had 3 stages, I'm going to scale it up to 5 stages. So as you will see now, the build stage remains same, but before I'm deploying in dev, I'm building my dev environment on the fly. Then I'm deploying in dev, then I'm building my prod environment on the fly, and then I'm deploying it in prod. So once my pipeline, let me see if it went through. So as you will see, the previous one, which was using templates, went through dev successfully, and it's now waiting for my review, and this time I'm going to reject because I don't like repeatability and reusability. But anyways, since I rejected this time, it didn't let my code to go in production. And you can go and see which checks failed because I rejected. I didn't want that code to go in. All right, so my last final changes where I am also going to provision infrastructure as well. So let me give a comment for IAC. I'll commit those. I'll click save. I'll go ahead and push my code changes. What's happening? Push. Hopefully it went. Let me go back to pipelines. As you will see, it triggered my pipeline again, but this time there are 5 stages. And as you can see, it's going to build and test stage is the first stage, then it's going to build my dev environment, it's going to deploy it in that, then it's going to go and build production. But again, my build, this particular task is targeted at production environment. It will still need my approval. Unless I go ahead and approve, it's not going to go and create those production resources.
Is it render different? If you have different conditions, like this one depends on these two.
Oh, you can do all that sort of, and I'm not doing it in my pipeline, but in your stages, you can do all that.
Does it kind of, I guess, make the line connections down here a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely. So what happens is, let's say if you have conditions like, if this condition satisfied, it should go and do this. If not, then it should go and do this. Like I was showing you that example that you can have a stage where if it go, the first target should be in United States, it should go and deploy it in United States region. But due to XYZ reason that fails, then your secondary region is in Europe, so it should go and deploy it in Europe. So But essentially right now you will see it's going to create it in the same resource group in Azure. It's going to spin up new database and new app service for my dev environment. Let me click on that and see where it is. It's right now testing. It's almost done. The build and test stage. So the first stage is completed. It's soon going to start my building my infrastructure. I should have better named it. This one and this one is all same. But you have all power to go ahead and change it in your pipelines and do what makes sense. So now it's building my infrastructure. It's downloading my ARM templates that I was showing you. Now it picked up those and it's starting the deployment. And if I go here, let's keep refreshing it. You will soon see resources starting showing up as and when that gets completed. So it says it created a deployment name, website SQL database with this string. We can certainly go ahead and check that too. Under resource group, if we'll go in deployments, you can see which one is going on, and this is the one which is going on, and it is right now deploying my code. I'm deploying my infrastructure. I can certainly go and see where it is. It has created the website, which is with this name, and it's right now provisioning the database. So if I close this, go back to my resource group, and here's the web app which has come up just now through my pipeline. If I go and see, it would still be a plain vanilla website unless it has started deploying it yet. I don't think so. Fingers crossed.
Are you able to roll back to previous releases?
Oh yes, you can. So it is still plain vanilla. And if you want to roll back, it is as simple as so if you'll go here, click on this. Let's say if you want to go to previous release, you click here and you can click on run new. It will essentially go and create a new run and do exactly what it did the last time. Hopefully it should be done soon. Database takes a little bit of extra time. Let me see if the database came up yet. So here is the database that it has created, SQL Server with that string. It's going to create the database as well shortly. But essentially, in a nutshell, it did provision everything. It's now going to deploy my code, which is not going to take probably more than a few seconds. And once it's done, you can see that my app was deployed on an infrastructure which I just provisioned as part of my pipeline. Now it's picking up my artifact that I built and published it in this stage, and it's now deploying it on the app service which I just created in my second stage. If I go back here, I'm expecting that once it's completed, it goes to this stage. It should be looking for my approval before it can go and do that, execute that. I believe it's almost done. Just bear with me. It should be done shortly. Let me go ahead and refresh that. Yep, so it's done. And as you can see, since this build production environment was set to in production environment, it's looking for my environment. Since it's gonna cost me money, I don't want to do it, I'm gonna reject it. So, but I guess you got the idea, and here is the app that I just got deployed on an infrastructure that I provisioned through my pipeline. So that's pretty much about the demo. Here are some of the links. I have a video on the same topic. The link for that is towards the bottom, the 5th one. If you are interested in going through the same thing again, you can certainly go and watch that video, and I'm sure this session is also recorded. You can watch that too. And again, I've given the link to the Azure Devops demo generator. I think if you are new to Azure Devops, or if you are trying to do some POCs, it's a good starting point. They give you some really good and cool boilerplate projects which can get you started. With that, I can certainly hang on for some time for question and answers if you have any questions. Here's some contact information. If you would like to reach out to me, feel free to do so. You can email me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever works best for you. And with that, thank you. And I can share the code if you would like to. I can share all the pipelines that I have created today. Just let me know and I can email you everything. And yeah, don't forget to delete the resources after you provision them in Azure. I'm gonna go and do that, otherwise it's gonna charge, they are gonna charge me for that.
Looks like that's the YAML is the future direction Microsoft.
I don't say that because classic pipelines are still supported. What I generally recommend is if it's a greenfield project, you are just starting afresh, go with YAML. But for brownfield projects, it depends on project to project. If you can utilize YAML, go with YAML. But if you are already utilizing classic, there is no harm till the time Microsoft comes back and saying they are retiring classic pipelines or they are retiring Azure DevOps completely.
When you try to create a pipeline, they took you to the screen to create YAML.
Sorry?
In DevOps also, they already updated.
Oh yeah, they keep changing UI, but but classic pipelines are still supported. So, that's the thing that I follow. If it's a brownfield project, something already exists, they are using classic pipelines, they still work good. But YAML gives you much more control. You can go ahead and edit it. You can maintain version history. You can have different pipelines in your different branches, different releases, which really gives you control. You can use things like templates. Templates are not supported in classic pipelines. Earlier, the advantage with classic pipelines was there is a concept called task groups, where you can create your own custom task and utilize them in pipelines. That was not there when YAML pipelines were launched. But recently I came to know that we can actually, Matt might already know, we have been doing some of that at our workplace.
Historically, there were task libraries, I think, or
task groups. They were called task groups.
Task groups. Yeah. Is it libraries today? Is that what?
So if I go back to my Azure DevOps, you see here task groups. So essentially, you can go ahead and create task groups, and then you can utilize them in your pipelines, classic pipelines. This feature was not available when I first presented on this topic in 2020. But looks like that is now possible. You can create your own custom task groups and then publish them as extensions and then use them in your...
Click on library real quick as well. I think you'll see it. So there's...
What is the task group? Does it have to be like a...
Task group is, the advantage you get is when I go here and edit my pipeline. 1 second. So what you are seeing towards the right are all the built-in tasks that Microsoft offers. But if I go ahead and build my own task groups, I can have multiple tasks within that, and that will start showing up here.
So is that, you write that in TypeScript, don't you? Or can you do just like the PowerShell?
You can do anything in that. It's all custom, and I can get you more details because I have learned recently that that's possible here. And the moment you go ahead and add your task groups, you can execute PowerShell, you can execute CLI, you can call webhooks. We are calling Ansible if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
over REST API in those task groups, and then once you publish those as extensions, it starts showing up in these tasks as custom task, and then just like how I was showing you can use these tasks, it generates YAML. One thing I should tell you, I don't have a project ready, but I should have done that. But one of the questions I generally hear back is, okay, I already have classic pipelines. How do I get started with YAML pipelines? How do I migrate them? There is no migration path directly, but if you'll go to your classic pipeline, there is an option there it says view YAML on each pipeline. If you'll click view YAML, it will give you the YAML code for that pipeline. You can copy that and I was like, Microsoft has been pretty lazy. If they would have just created a button saying generate pipeline, it would have captured that code and created pipeline for you, but that is how it is. So that's the only way I found.
Actually, it's giving YAML, but
Thanks to Microsoft.
And also the Azure Devops, the playground you showed.
Azure Devops demo generator.
Yeah, the demo generator, that's cool. Right?
And especially if you're going through Microsoft Learn modules, they have many reference architectures that they use. They have many projects. Most of those projects are there in that demo generator. So if we'll go inside this, choose templates and go under this Microsoft Learn. Oops.
Microsoft created this.
I don't think so that it's Microsoft's only effort. I think it's community based. So you will see all these link back to the modules in Microsoft Learn, which is very powerful. One drawback now is when you are using Azure DevOps, you have to create an Azure DevOps organization. And because of all the cryptocurrency mining and stuff, they don't give you, what do they call that? They don't give you build hours, or what do they call it? I mean, you have to request them so that they can give you access so that you can execute your pipelines. What is that called? I missed that. It's a brain
I
fart.
think build hours is as close as.
I mean, when you run your pipelines, you need agents and certain quota where you can go ahead and execute your pipelines. Initially, when you used to go and create your free organization in Azure DevOps, you used to get, I think, 100 or some number of hours, but now they have restricted because people were really misusing that. They were creating these agents, and in their pipelines they were essentially mining cryptocurrencies. So they went ahead and they blocked it. So if you need it, there is a link. I don't have it open, but if you'll Google it, you can find it. Go ahead and place a request within a day or two. They will review if your request is genuine or not. But that's how that thing goes. So luckily, I got one organization for which I already have got those. So if you already have an organization which has got those free credits, they won't take it away unless you are doing mining.
With MSDN, you said.
Sorry?
With MSDN account, you get free credit. With that,
Even with that, if you'll create, they will not give you those credits for free. I mean, they will give you credits, they will not come by default. You have to go and place a request to them saying, hey, I'm this and this, I'm trying to do this and this, so please give me some hours. But Microsoft is not wrong there, I would say so. But yeah, that's pretty much I had. So if you have anything, you can ask me now or reach out to me later as well.
Thank you.
Anything online, anyone? You're the only guy, Matt, there. Can I just leave?
All right. Good. Thank you.
You want to do something on the screen, or I should
Nope.
stop sharing?
We're done over there. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. We are meeting over at Buffalo Wings and Rings. That way. Where Harbinger will be providing snacks, appetizers, all sorts of good stuff, and we'll get to talk a little bit over there. So just so that we can kind of get an idea how many places to grab, how many people are planning on heading over there? 4, 5?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Vivo, for yes. Okay.
I don't know if anybody's listening. User Group will be doing our annual sponsorship drive here in a week or two. So if your company's interested in sponsoring the user group, we'd love to talk to you. They will sell out very quickly. I think last year we sold out in a minute and a half. So they go pretty quick. We only have 11 that we sell, so low supply, high demand. And then...
Unless we can figure out how to get another month in the year.
That's true, yes.
February.
Or we could just do like Vibov does and then like do it twice a month. So I don't know how you do that. And the other thing is we are going to meet in December. It'll be the 2nd or the 9th of December. I don't have a speaker for that meeting, so if anybody's interested in speaking, that'd be great. If you are not able to do a full presentation and want to do like a little 15-minute snippet about what you're working on at work or something cool that you've done, we can do some lightning rounds as well. Brian and I can come up with 15 minutes of content in probably 5 minutes. So it won't be a big deal. So yeah, anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes are what lightning rounds usually entail. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Yeah, thanks Vibov, and thanks Farm Credit for sponsoring. So Azure, I think the Farm Credit guys are sitting out there on the way out. Make sure you say hi to them, and thanks for sponsoring for us. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.